Hey guys, I'm Daniel Hughes, and this is my wife, Colonie Hughes.
Hi.
We're here in Anniston, Alabama, with our ministry at Springs Ministries. Colonie, won't you tell these guys what Seven Springs does?
Well, Seven Springs, we do a lot of different things, but our main mission is to minister to those who don't have any hope. The majority of the people that we minister to is people that are addicted to drugs, their families, homeless people. A lot of time we take women that have been involved in sex trafficking and abuse in relationships. So it's kind of hard to define exactly what we do because we do so many different things. Well, our main thing that we feel like we've gotten from the heart of our Father is to restore the broken and rebuild our cities.
Okay. And what we're adding to that is once a week we're going to sit down together and share our stories and invite other people in and tell their stories and try to inspire and to bring hope to those that are broken and those that are broken with broken people that they love and are suffering from addiction and walking through the recovery process. And so this is what we're going to call our hour of hope. So if you guys will stay tuned, we'll be back in just a minute, and me and Colonie are going to share our stories with you today. Okay, guys, welcome back. Like I said before we close, we're going to share our story with you and introducing again my wife, Colonie Hughes, my bride. I'm going to throw the ball to her and give her a few minutes and let her share her story with you guys. And Colonie, won't you tell them where you came from and kind of what's going on all the way up to what's going on with you today and what the Lord is doing in your life?
Okay, one of the things that I kind of had in my heart to share about my story was when I was younger, I always had negative thoughts continually in my mind as a child. I heard you're a failure, you're never going to be anybody, you're stupid, I hate you. And I did not even realize that I lived, Daniel, with these thoughts all the time, just every single day. And I didn't even realize why I was so angry. I dealt with horrible anger. My family, my mom, my dad, they would fly me. My dad's from Gadsden, Alabama, and my mom's from Washington, but they didn't know what to do with me. So every year they would fly me back and forth, and my anger just grew.
Who were you mad at?
Who was I mad at? Well, I didn't know who I was mad at the time.
Just mad.
I was just mad. And I started about 12 or 13, I started, running away. I never could fit into school anywhere because I had tried all kind of groups. I didn't fit with the preppy crowd. I tried hanging out with the gangsters. That didn't work. The skaters, those.
So this was back in the early 90s when they were real gangsters.
They thought they were gangsters, but I went to a very large school when I was in Seattle, so, there was a lot of gang activity up there. But I could never really fit in, and I was really insecure, and like I said, I was angry. So about 12, 13 years old, I didn't want to listen to my parents, and I started running away. And all I knew is I just didn't want to be at home. I didn't really know, and that's when I started dabbling in drinking and, smoking marijuana. And
what age was this?
That was at 13.
13.
My parents, like I said, they didn't know what to do with me.
You needed a whooping.
Yeah. They didn't know what to do with me, so I was in and out of juvenile detention centers, boot camp that I spent time in. I was even sent to a mental institution, a lockdown facility, and all of those things only increased my anger. By 14, I went from just drug and alcohol use to heavy marijuana use to all the way to being an IV drug user. Because I didn't realize it at the time, Daniel, and this is something that I kind of had on my heart to share was, I really enjoyed doing drugs because it's like it really stopped those negative thoughts. Because when I wasn't using, I wanted to cut myself, hurt myself. I didn't want to live anymore. So actually the drug use kind of quieted, those thoughts. But of course that was not a healthy way to cope, as you know. And so when I started using,
It took the pain away,
it did. It took the pain away, and I loved it. When I started shooting at meth and cocaine, it was cocaine back then.
I've heard you say this before. I've heard you say, I loved it, and I understand what you're saying, and a lot of people may not understand that. But when you say I loved getting high, it was because you loved not hurting, and you
I
loved
loved
being
not
accepted.
feeling.
Yeah.
It took my insecurities away. I didn't have to feel anymore. And it also, that rush and that euphoric feeling when you get off of shooting up crystal meth. And that was something that I chased continually. You'll hear.
How old were you when you started using drugs intravenously? I know you told me it was like 16 or something.
Yeah, no, it was 13 or 14.
13 or 14.
And, I loved it. I loved that euphoric feeling, and I chased it because, you'll hear about people talk about chasing that high. Well, they're always trying to get back to that first high that they felt, or get to that same place that they were at. And that's
during that time, was there people telling you, like I know for me, and I'll tell some of my story in a minute, but, was there people trying to intervene in your life? Family or people telling you don't need to do this with your life, or don't do drugs, just say no. That was a big thing back then.
Well, of course, my parents, which, they were divorced, and still are, but of course they were trying to talk to me, but I was so angry and full of hate and rebellion towards them, there wasn't really much they could tell me, And
by this time, they were probably mad at you too.
I'm sure. So, being a young girl, having, an increased, habit, I started hanging out with, older men. My friends that could hang out with older men, I would hang out with them because, drugs were free. If you did that, it's not like I had to go around and steal. Mm-hmm. And at that age, about 14.
I think a lot of times, not that women can't get off drugs or that it's harder to get off drugs, but in our field, I see a lot of times sometimes it's further for a woman to hit a bottom to get off of drugs because there typically is that availability for a woman or a man. If he doesn't have any money, he doesn't have any drugs, and it seems to always be some older guy that's willing to, give or support a woman. So I've seen that. I believe that's why you have the same amount of girls as you do guys. But when you look at the ratio of how many guys are in prison versus girls, or how many guys are in rehab versus girls, it seems to be like there's more men, and I believe it's because it's for a woman. There's always opportunity there for for them to be able to move to the next person or whatever and get provided for. And maybe like that with some guys, but only a couple.
Yeah, there was never lacking any opportunity, and then that's actually where I got introduced to. Sex trafficking at a young age. I was 14. My friend who was the same age as me, and she had a younger sister, her parents allowed her to date a 30-year-old man because he would bring her parents drugs. And her sister, who was 11 or 12 at the time, was also, pimped out to their friends for dope. And so I didn't really process kind of what was going on at the time. I just knew that when I hung out with them, I could do whatever I wanted. And that really led me down a really bad road. There's years that I don't remember.
Like you literally don't have recollection of months at a time?
There's times where I would be getting high and wake up 3 days later and wonder why nobody took me to the hospital, have no recollection of what happened. And so those years were pretty much a blur for me. But anyways, I kept going on. Doing what I was doing and didn't care what anybody thought. I lived to be high. I'd carry a syringe in my sock because if any opportunity I had, that's how I was going to put it in there. And you'll hear people talk about how they later on get addicted to the needle, and I can understand that because whatever I could crush down and put in it, that's what I was going to do. So that led to, of course, more situations. One that was really difficult for me and that I still have a hard time with today is I still cry about it. And Daniel says there's so much trauma, for women that have been through what I've been through with this. But I don't know if I was 15 or 16, but I was actually raped by a friend. I was completely out of it one night, and it's like you have this inner sense that you kind of know what's happened to you, and I realized that I just knew I was pregnant. And, you know, I didn't want to tell anybody because I figured they wouldn't believe me. And, you know, I don't think they did really on some level. And, you know, I didn't know what to do. The devil really lied to me at that time in my life because I felt like I was so sinful. And it's crazy to even admit this to people, but I really felt like that this child was going to be evil. I was so lied to in my mind. I really thought that.
Well, you know, and I believe that you see a lot in religious circles, you know, and obviously I believe that with you because, I mean, you've had extensive, you know, conversation and prayer over the subject, you know, but you hear a lot now where, you know, there's, pro-life, pro-choice, this, that, the other, you know, so a lot of times, you know, Christians are real condescending and real condemning, you know, over abortion, and I completely understand that mindset, and I think me and you're both in agreement that you know we're pro-life and that you know we don't want anybody to have an abortion. And,
no, because I know
you even
what,
regret getting raped and having an abortion, right?
Right, absolutely. Now that I'm older and really understand the trauma that goes with having an abortion.
But the demonization of the ladies that's actually having them. You know, is I think for the most part, in my experience, has been like you, just deceived.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. You know, I live with negative thoughts. I was lied to. I was completely deceived about this pregnancy. I felt so much shame about having to go and tell my family I was pregnant. You know, my dad was against the abortion. They tried to get me to go to Save a Life. But I was so filled with hate and anger and lies. I mean, I just could really not see another way out.
So you literally, in your own mind, you're doing crystal meth, you're pregnant, you've been date raped or whatever, and literally in your own mind, and you believe that you were going to give birth to a demon child.
I know that sounds
I know it's
crazy.
out there, but I mean, but you were on crystal meth and you were young and deceived.
Yeah.
So that, yeah.
And I was, and on the flip side of it, I didn't want to stop getting high. And so, you know, I actually tried to have the abortion myself. I tried to overdose. And I couldn't. I could not use enough drugs to cause me to lose a baby.
You think you're stopping on and telling this story at 16, 17, however old you was when this happened, is because this was a turning point in your life where things got dark, right?
I'm 36 now. And that happened when I think I was 16, and I still feel like I need healing. I mean, I still have regrets about it.
When me and Colonie, you know, when we first got married, you know, we've been experiencing different stuff, you know, like, you know, being married comes with problems, you know, in situations, and iron sharpens iron. But we would run into these certain areas where her heart, I could just tell she was hurt. And I, you know, as a husband loving her, I'm searching and asking God, you know, what's going on? And Colonie's like, you know, well, you know, I've repented for everything, and I'm not having any sin in my life, you know, and I'm like, well, you know, obviously there's something in you hurt, you know, that's getting hit, and you know, let's just seek the Lord on it. And early on, I said, you know, I really think that there's more healing that the Lord wants to do over this issue. You know, this issue, your baby that you've lost. You know, I think the Lord wants to go deeper and to heal you. And her knee-jerk reaction, I think, from just a wall of being built of not wanting to deal with that, would be no, I'm healed.
Yeah.
God forgave me. I went through that. I've talked, you know, and you know.
And I have received a lot of healing, but there's layers. You know, there's layers to the trauma, and but going back, you know, I finally, you know, like I said, I tried to lose a baby, that didn't work, and then, you know, so I did decide to go through with the abortion.
Can I tell you, I want to take a minute. I don't know how far we can get in our Hope Hour, but I really feel impressed to share this story with you. We don't have a script. We didn't know we'd be talking about. We didn't know we'd be talking about this. Less than a year ago, me and Colonie went to a conference at Morning Star Ministries with Rick Joyner in South Carolina, Fort Mills, and while we were there was a lady, I can't remember her name, but she was talking about having experiences in heaven and what it looked like for babies that had been aborted, and the healing for the mothers and this and that. And Colonie was just truly touched, and just the goodness of God just flowing over her, healing taking place. And I feel like she had experienced the Lord. And she told me for the first time, she said, I know it's always been kind of embarrassing for me to say this, but I feel like the Lord has told me the name of my little girl. And I said, how do you know it's a little girl? She said, I feel like the Lord showed me that. And I feel like her name is Hope Love. Mm-hmm. And
which he had told me actually her name years back when I went through Teen Challenge, but I actually had never told
she had never told me, right?
Yeah, I had never told you.
And
I don't know why, just personal, and I just never even mentioned it to you.
Well, this wasn't around Christmas time because it wasn't cold, was it?
Yeah, it was a little chilly, beginning of this year. It was after Christmas, I think.
I think it was after Christmas, yeah, but so it was bizarre to see any lights. Christmas lights is the reason. It wasn't Christmas time like Christmas lights was out. But we pull up at this stop sign. We're weeping. The girls, we have a couple girls that come from the Esther House, which I'll tell you more about later. Esther House is a program that Colonie actually heads up. That houses and disciples young girls and some older girls. But so we carried a group with us, and we're pulling out of that church. And we're back on the way back to the hotel because it was a conference. And when we pull up at the stop sign, Colonie says to me, I've never said this before, it's kind of embarrassing, but I feel like the Lord has told me the name. And she's crying and she's getting healing. Another girl that's had an abortion, she's going through the whole, she's getting healed, and they're weeping. And I think to myself, Hope Love. I started seeing this baby with this experience of people taking care of the baby and raising the baby, and Colonie even getting to help raise the baby after she's in glory. And that's kind of what the woman, Kat Kerr, I think was her name, was sharing about, was some of the mothers were getting to help in the baby's raisins. Now, I don't know about that biblically. It was just she was sharing an experience she had. And we pulled out. And,
so I told you, yeah, her name, the Lord told me, was Hope Love. Mm-hmm.
So from where she said that, about 100 yards away, we turned a corner, and on the roof of a house, in probably 10-foot letters, it said Hope in Christmas lights. I said, oh my God. And it was like it was from heaven. And when I passed it and looked in my rearview mirror, the other side of the house said Love. And it was God's confirmation to us. And obviously we know but that he was in that healing, and that she's with him, and that when Colonie is going to get complete restoration in that. And that's what I know from losing people to losing babies or parents is God's in the restoration business. And see, not only is he going to restore here, he's in eternity. He's not in time. He's not in time, and he can absolutely restore children to their parents and parents to their children and family in eternity. He's not working in this earth and in time. And that's why I know that I feel confident that there will be complete restoration between you and her. Mm-hmm. And but anyways, you can go ahead and share some more of your story, but kind of take off from there. That was a pivotal time in your life, and I guess things got really dark at that point. And so what did the next couple of years look like?
Well, after I decided to go through with the abortion, I completely had to block it out. I went completely cold and refused to think about it, never talked about it. It was just something that I just completely pushed back, and
did your drug use kind of go to another level? Or
yeah, my drug use was already pretty extensive, but I definitely increased it. When I would get high, Daniel, if I lived through it, I felt like I had gotten a good buzz.
So you wanted to take it to that line. You wanted to take that, and you see that like a lot now. We lost, weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, sometimes monthly. We're losing people to this heroin and fentanyl epidemic, and also to crystal meth and stuff, also in pills. But it's funny when you're not funny is not the right word, but when you're there, it's almost like that's the most euphoric you can get is how close can I get to all the way going out without going out.
Yeah, and I just wanted to back up a little bit about, because we've been talking about abortion, no one likes to talk about it, but, there's several women that come through the Esther house that have had abortions. Some women 8 to 10 abortions, Daniel, and I've only had one. And so I can't imagine how damaging and how much pain that somebody went through that had so many different abortions.
Well, the trauma of the
they
soul.
Have to, right.
The soul is, not trying to finish each one of her sentences, but what I've experienced this, and not just with abortion, but with when you sin or when you're sinned against or when there's trauma, it causes their soul to be wounded. And a person can have a Jesus experience and come to the Lord. And sometimes healing is a process. That's why you have so many people that get baptized, call out to the Lord, repent for their sins, and they're still, however they're manifesting, it's because their soul has been injured. And I think that's what we've seen, and even with you and with me, is the time for the soul to be healed. So it is, I can't even relate to you with this one thing, and more or less these girls we've dealt with 6 or 8 abortions, how many walls is built and how much trauma there is in the soul. And that's where we get into this. I don't think there's a devil behind every bush. And I don't think, you have that dilemma a lot. Can a Christian have a devil, this, that, and the other? I do know this is when you have a wounded soul and a place in you is not healed, it gives the enemy access there because, see, it still has a place that he can poke and bring in insecurities and hurts and almost like, and without going down some trail about devils and this and that and the other, but, there's a wounded soul, there's access there for the enemy to come in and to cause rejection and to cause hurt and kind of inflict and hit that pain and bring guilt, shame, and condemnation. And we're talking about this, but the good news is there's absolute positively healing. And
there's good news.
I've been with Colonie for 10 years, and through that process, I've been getting healed, and we're coming to the light together. But I know, and this is the point of what we're doing in this hour of hope that we're doing, is not to just shine light on the reality of darkness, but to show and to express once that light of the love of the Lord comes in your life, how it may be processed, but there's absolutely hope and there's absolute healing because there, Colonie has grew leaps and bounds and healing after healing, as well as myself over the years, and so, anyways, that's
So you're right, Daniel, and there is good news. There is a restoration and good news.
And
after all this,
and if Cat Kerr's right, you get to raise the baby.
Right,
you get to raise your baby. It'll be neat.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, after that, then my drug use increased. I would mix different drugs. I really was. I had a preference, crystal meth was my favorite, but really what was ever available. I've tried everything, but whatever anybody had, that's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And the years rocked on, and the years after that are actually a blur. That's just heavy drug use. And then I would say, it got really bad a few years later after that relationship with my friend that had actually raped me, I started, and I want to say this because people do not understand why addicts do what they do. I actually went back and started hanging out with that guy. And, I don't know why I did that. I was hurt and had unhealthy relationships, but that only proved to my family that I lied or that they couldn't understand that. And
well, isn't that what we see all the time with people that are being prostituted or pimped or caught in sex trafficking, because they don't because they're not chained up, or because they're not locked in a room that people would assume that they're not trafficked, or that they're not held against their will. It's like, how do you hold a whole country against its will, or how do you imprison somebody? It's psychological and spiritual warfare. So what's happening is, even though that you're still in that relationship, you're incarcerated, you're in bondage,
Yeah, and that really, from that point, my family was pretty disgusted with me. And, my dad had caught us at his house. And at that point, it was a huge fight. And my answer, because my thinking is just, you have to understand, for someone who's on, all these different types of drugs, sleep deprivation, haven't been eating any food, your thinking is pretty gone. So my answer was to drive to Las Vegas and start a new life.
What was you going to do in Las Vegas?
I didn't know, but that's where I was headed. We bought as many drugs as we could. I stole my dad's car and off we went. And our car broke down in Nebraska, in the middle of the map. So, from there, he was extradited back to Alabama because he was on parole. And, like I said earlier, I lived on my own. I lived as a runaway. I lived incarcerated for most of my childhood.
When you go to Nebraska, at this point, what are you, 19?
Yeah, and it wasn't nothing for me to be alone. I didn't have any relationships with no friends.
So you had been traveling the country, been living in homeless shelters, been...
when I had ran away, I'd stay in abandoned buildings. So for me to stay there, that's not really outside of my character, because I was pretty stubborn. And I decided, I'm not gonna tell anybody where I'm at, and I don't think my family knew where I was at for maybe a year that I stayed. And, I did go to a homeless shelter and I did get a job. And then, I felt like I was doing good because actually at that time I was only smoking pot and taking pills.
That's pretty good for that time in your life.
Yeah, so to me I was actually sober. Or I felt like I was doing good. But, another traumatic event at that point. And, I'm just kind of hitting these because this is where, I know a lot of people have gone through stuff like this. And this is where the trauma really increased was, and I'll just shorten the story, but, I was actually attacked when I was off of work by actually one of my coworkers. And I was, I was hospitalized. He had been stalking me at work. And, it was just I didn't realize.
What kept you, and I didn't intend on interviewing you today, but just my thoughts.
I don't mind you interviewing me.
What kept you, Colonie, because knowing girls and the temptations and the pull, at this point in your life, as hurt as you were, as strung out as you were, and you say, I think you was working in a chicken plant, is that right?
Yeah, I was working at a beef packing plant.
What was keeping you from being all out, a prostitute or stripper? At that time.
I think for me, I was involved in prostitution because I would have sex with people for drugs.
Yeah.
I just wasn't smart enough, I guess, to get money for it.
Say it again, I'll beep it out.
But, for me, the reason...
It's more of an indirect type.
It was more indirect type of prostitution, but also not just that. The reason why I tried stripping, but like I said, for me, I was really insecure. I had always been insecure with, my body and who I was, and felt a lot of shame. So I tried it, but I just couldn't seem to muster up the courage to do it.
So your shame saved you at the time.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. But, and from there, I was, like I said, he had been stalking me. I got attacked, and, he beat me almost to death. Mm-hmm. You asked me earlier, and I want to point out in the beginning, you said when you were younger, did anyone ever try to reach out to you? When I was really young, I can't remember a teacher or someone at the school, or anybody trying to reach out to me. Nobody comes to mind other than my family trying to tell me, but I don't remember, anybody highlighted that was trying to help me. During this time that we're talking about, when I was in Nebraska, there was a woman that had been reaching out to me and sharing the gospel with me and checking on me and stuff. And when I was hospitalized, and I want to say this, when in that moment where, I was getting beat and I was actually unconscious, he had actually charged me into the closet and he was choking me to death. And in that moment, Daniel, I didn't think about, you don't even have time to reflect on your life or even death itself. And something, he looked at me and something stopped him and he looked scared, and I remember that he ran out of the apartment. And
It's like he had a moment of clarity or seen some.
Yeah, moment of clarity or seeing something. I know that it was prayers and that God.
Did you know then, or do you know now?
I think I knew then. I think I did. Yeah.
So that
I knew that there was something that had protected me from him, because he looked frightened and he dropped me, and the screams, the neighbors didn't even come and rescue me because they were coke addicts. I think the reason how the ambulance and police found me was because people on the street had heard my screams.
So you think this may have been the beginning of your spiritual awakening?
I think, yes, it was the beginning of my spiritual awakening, because I knew that something rescued me in there. Something did. And the lady that I'm talking to you about, who I call my angel, she's the one that came to the hospital and found me. She helped me clean the blood up in my apartment. She let me stay at her house for a couple days at the risk of her job, because she actually had a, nonprofit that she worked at for women that had been in domestic violence situations. Okay. And so
let's hold it right there and take a break. And when we come back, we'll just start from there, and we'll talk about your spiritual awakening and how you met the Lord and what things look like from there. Okay? We'll be right back. Hey guys, welcome back. Before the break, we were talking with Colonie, and she was telling you guys about her life and her experience, and we got to the point where she had her spiritual awakening. And so Colonie, just pick up there, when you first had your spiritual awakening, and tell us what it looked like when you met the Lord and began to be enlightened spiritually, and things began to shift in your life, and the Lord, delivered you and brought you out of that darkness you were living in.
Well, I don't know really how to explain it, but from right there, that's pretty much where, all hell broke loose. I didn't know, my grandfather was a pastor, and, so I had some introduction of church when I was a kid, but, I didn't really believe in God for myself. It was more like I thought that I did because I didn't want to go to hell, like a storybook kind of thing.
And then you had introduction to church because your granddaddy was a pastor.
Right.
But the thing that I know about your granddaddy is what you also had an introduction to was unconditional love that he had for you.
Right.
Because he had so much of Jesus in him.
Right.
So you knew church because he was a pastor, but you also knew the love of God because Colonie's granddad, and I'll just tell this for you, was and not knocking any of her family, she's got a good family that loves her, but her granddad would never give up on Colonie. He says, one day you're going to be on television telling people what God's did for you. And it's mind-blowing. He did that. He's passed away a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But so I just want to make sure, because see, some people's got a bad taste of church. So when she says I had an introduction to church.
A little bit of my introduction, this is just a side note, is that he would actually give me money to read the Bible, and I would take it and go buy drugs with it.
But did you read the Bible?
But I did read it because I felt like I'd be dishonoring him in that way.
Okay.
See, that's that twisted thinking. But anyways,
I got to hush a little bit because we got the hour of hope here, and it's going to turn into 2 hours of hope. Go ahead, Colin.
But not knowing, that much about spiritual things, I could feel God lift his hand of protection off of me a little bit. I really can't explain that, but I could feel it. All hell broke loose. Like I said, I was smoking pot and taking pills. It was Christmas time after I had been violently attacked. I immediately went back to shooting up, and here I am, and I don't know anybody. I'm in Nebraska.
You told me you had a spiritual encounter. Now you just told me you went back to shooting up.
I did. I didn't really know what was happening in my spiritual encounter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went back to getting high. I was ashamed. I didn't feel like no one would believe me, and why should they? At this point, I am a manipulator and a liar, and so it was hard to believe anything that I said. And I found someone, which was never hard for me to find anybody getting high, and I started back on drugs, really heavy. Mm-hmm. I lost the little apartment I got. Of course, I lost my job. Everything that I had, I completely lost within probably a couple weeks.
Now, do you think this is God taking his hand off of you, or you think God may have been putting his hand on you?
Well, I'm not really sure. I know that he didn't leave me, but
Because
he allowed.
a lot of times when he'll put his hand on you, everything will fall apart to bring you into a place.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything was falling apart because he was trying
But
to
it was
get me to
setting you
that
up,
place.
and it was, it was set, when things are falling apart. I know for me, that's why I'm
Yeah,
asking.
I just felt like he was lifting his hand of like allowing certain things to happen.
Yeah,
to
that
me
hadn't happened before.
that hadn't happened before. I didn't realize in my drug usage that I actually had so much protection from God on my life. I didn't realize that until this stuff started happening. But anyways, from that time, I was somebody just trying to catch a buzz, and I somehow immediately fell into the drug cartel over there.
Yeah, it was maybe like some type of a Mexican drug cartel.
Yes. Really, it was way, Daniel, above my head. Like, it was more drugs that I had ever seen, and it left me really terrified because I knew that I was kind of messing on a level that I was like not familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
They would move drugs from Mexico to Nebraska, and at that point they would,
And in this time too, and from I have a similar experience, and like I said, I really want us to be able to get to our Jesus story in the hour. But in this is part of our Jesus story. But
yeah.
But what you're talking about, I understand, because I remember hitting that next gear where you think you know evil, you've been in the drug culture, and then you move into the next level where the people that you're with is not just getting high, but they're actually immersed into darkness, and they know it, and they've embraced it, and that's kind of where you were at.
Because
you found yourself twisted up with a drug cartel, and if my memory serves me, you even narrowly escaped being kidnapped and brought back into Mexico in sex trafficking, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and for time's sake, I won't, get into all that. But, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And when I was at the point where I didn't know if I was going to live or die, you always know who to call. And I did not think I was going to make it through the night. And I looking back on it, I don't think that I would have. And I called my grandfather. It was 2:00 in the morning in a hotel room. And I told him, I cry because he's passed away now. So when I talk about him, it makes me cry. But, I said, I'm ready. I want Jesus. I don't know if I'm going to make it tonight. And I came to Jesus just out of fear of dying. Is why I came to him. And I got on my knees that night. And he walked me through the sinner's prayer. And I gave my heart to Jesus. Now, I didn't know what that looked like or what that meant. But nothing super miraculous necessarily even happened that night that I gave my heart to Jesus, but I did, and I meant it.
You didn't die. You said
I didn't die, and the next day when I left, and that angel I was talking about, she actually took me to a detox center, but it was like I could see sin for the first time. Like I had never really seen sin or evil, or knew what it was. And I told God, I was like, this world is so evil, how am I ever going to make it? And all of a sudden, when I said that, the peace of God that surpasses all understanding flooded inside of me, and all of a sudden, the clouds were blue. Or not the clouds, but the sky was blue. I had never seen the sky. It's like seeing the sky for the first time, and everything was illuminated in color. And I knew at that moment, Daniel, that if I went to prison, if I died, no matter what happened to me, that I had Jesus, and I was going to be okay. I've
had an identical experience, and it's hard to explain. I don't think it's hard to explain to somebody that's encountered the Lord, but it's like that veil comes off where I was in my 20s before I even ever realized that there were season changes. I had learned about them, but I never seen them. The mountains come alive, the trees come alive, the clouds are alive, the grass is alive. You don't appreciate. It's like you go from seeing in black and white to seeing in color.
Yeah, I didn't appreciate anything. I was so self-consumed with my own selfish desires that I never stopped to look at the stars. I never stopped to look at God's creation in the trees or, all those things. I just completely missed it. And the only thing that I was driven by was chasing the next high.
So tell us what happened after you said the sinner's prayer.
Okay. my friend took me to the detox center, and immediately God delivered me, out of a situation that was impossible. I had people, disappearing, looking for me, FBI
But
picking
the
me
FBI
up.
picked you up a couple times,
It was
interrogated
like,
you.
you know how that scripture that says, that he's made a way out for us?
Yeah.
He miraculously, unexplained, just delivered me out of that situation. She actually took me out of town, and I went to a detox center and later on to a homeless shelter. And, I would go, stay at the homeless shelter, and those are some of my best memories, walking with God, because he spoke to me.
Because you had peace. I can remember going to prison, and it's hard to explain to somebody that don't know, but some of the best, my earliest memories, some of the best times that I've had with the Lord is just been full of hope and full of peace. And like you said, that self of well-being, knowing that you're with Jesus, and no matter what happens, as long as he don't leave you. And we know now that he never leave us or forsake us, but that peace in that homeless shelter with your journal, or when I was in prison with my Bible, it's like it's hard to explain how you could be incarcerated or be completely without anything, because it's the same thing with me. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's like it surpasses understanding, because when you get Jesus, it's like you don't need anything else.
No.
Yeah, and I've been in the same place. I can remember experiencing the peace of God in the county jail and in prison, and having a peace that transcends understanding. No car,
Yeah,
nothing.
And just completely full of joy.
Completely
Full of joy. Jesus had found me, or I had found him one, and that's all I needed. So moving, fast forwarding through that, I spent a few months there. At this point, I had made contact with my family about where I was at, and, decided to go back home.
Yeah.
And, from there.
Home is Alabama, right?
Home is Alabama.
Sweet home Alabama.
Sweet home Alabama, yeah. And, and I was doing great, and then I drank a beer. And all I did was drink a beer, but to me, I failed at Christianity.
So it probably wasn't the beer, it was probably condemnation, huh?
It was condemnation. What could have been just no big deal, pick yourself back up. It's not even, that big of a deal. Just completely I decided I couldn't do this Christian thing. Mm-hmm. And I felt like such a failure once again. And I felt like I had failed God. And that really led me back down the same pattern as
you
before.
You had encountered Jesus, encountered his forgiveness.
Yeah.
And walking in the light, and the enemy was sitting right there waiting to lie to you.
And I loved him.
Yeah.
I never, people say, why do you come to God? When you realize that God loves you, nobody could tell me about how good God was, but when I knew how much God loved me, that's what changed me. And then when I felt like
the goodness of God leads to repentance.
Yeah, and when I felt like I had failed God, the enemy came back in and started lying to me again, because for a while, those thoughts that I had told you about that I had as a kid, when I experienced the love of Jesus, those went away. Mm-hmm. Where I used to use the drugs to get them to go away to cope. Mm-hmm. Well, once I had the peace of God, there was no more thoughts.
Your identity started changing, right?
But when I, drank that beer, and that led to condemnation, which led me down to the same cycle again. Mm-hmm. And people have said, then you probably weren't saved, is what I've heard. But I know I had a genuine encounter. And from there...
I believe you were saved.
Yeah, me too. From there, it led me down my drug usage again. The times had changed. Oxycontin was a big thing now. They had come out with Oxycontin, and that was readily available.
I remember Oxycontin. I think the pharmaceutical company spent a couple $billion to prove it wasn't addictive, maybe.
Right, and Oxycontin was actually more available to me than meth at this time. Mm-hmm. So I had actually started shooting up Oxycontin, morphine, things of that nature. And that was a whole different level. That was a different kind of high, because, when you're up on shooting up meth, you're just up for a long time. When you're shooting up morphine and Oxycontin, your body is dependent on it, and you can't get out of the bed without a shot of dope, and so.
It took you to a pretty dark place. I remember a story you told me, about where the task force come in. And
yeah, they came in, and I was actually pregnant with my daughter. I was pregnant again.
With our baby.
Yeah.
Hadn't met you yet, but it's our baby.
Yeah. And still getting high, unfortunately. And the task force came in for, we had been robbing pharmacies
What would
to
you charge?
support our drug habit.
What would you charge with?
I think it was 13 felonies and trafficking morphine. And at that time I went to jail. And
Tell them about the video. I get a kick out of the video.
well, going to jail saved my daughter's life. You know, when I went to jail, Daniel, and they clicked that jail cell door behind me, I really thought I was never getting out. And
I can imagine. I had one trafficking charge, and I did some years in prison. You had 13,
I had
so you probably
13.
thought it was over with, huh?
Yeah, I thought it was done. I was able to actually, go through a 28-day program and get out on bond. And one thing that I did that Daniel wanted me to share was I was in such a bad state during that time when I was getting high. It looked like a horror movie if you could see, just the house we lived in. And I videotaped us. And I videotaped us because I could never tell. This was the guy I was dating at the time how bad off we were, because the whole crowd was like a zombie. And anyways, I videotaped it, and the task force got the videotape, and after that, they would actually take it to the local schools around here in Etowah and Calhoun County.
So
and show
you were
show
what
kids
not
how
to be, right?
I was what not to be.
The face of meth. This is what drugs will do to you.
And it was really hard for me though, getting high, because I had that encounter with God, and I knew that God had saved me, and I knew He didn't want me to live this way.
So you turned into that drug addict that talked about Jesus and wanted to read the Bible.
Well, after I did that 28-day program and I was out on bond, I had my daughter at this time, and I started getting high again. And I was that person you never wanted to get high with, because I was reading the Bible, I was preaching to everybody about Jesus, and nobody wanted to hear that. I even would turn on TBN on the TV, because anything that could give me that peace, is what I wanted. But long story short, I give my daughter to my grandmother because in my mind, she was too pure to be around somebody like me. And I felt like I had failed her, failed God. And I just continued getting high. And, God was tugging on me. I was miserable. It wasn't like before where I could get high and just think about myself. Like, I was literally miserable, and getting high had lost its appeal. Like,
So those doors shut behind you in jail. And
yeah.
And so, did you know you was finished then? With drugs,
I couldn't figure out why I couldn't stop getting high. Like, I think I had started to have a genuine desire not to, because I wanted to be a Christian, and I didn't know how. I didn't know why I kept getting high. And actually, God was tugging on me. I had been, back to shooting up dope again. I was back on meth and staying up for long periods of time. And you know how people always wait for a rock bottom? That rock bottom is when you'll hear it a lot in addiction, is when somebody comes to the end of themselves. And I had come to the end, but nothing really bad had happened, but I could feel God tugging on me. And I could feel the intercession of people praying for me. And, I had prayed over myself in one of the houses that I was at. And I had picked up a few, religious things to do, or so I thought. And I prayed.
You'd watched a lot of TV.
Yeah, a lot of TBN.
Yeah.
But I prayed the armor of God over me. And
what is the armor? You talking about the whole armor?
The whole armor, from the helmet down to the shoes. I prayed the whole thing over me, and I didn't say anything. And the reason I prayed was because I was terrified. I had gotten scared again, and I didn't know what was going to happen to me. And I didn't tell the guy that I was with that I had prayed. And at that point, he turned and looked at me, and he said, "You have a shield up." And I said, "Yes, I do." And the Lord told me what He would do if you touched His anointed one. And I didn't even talk like that, Daniel. It was I know now the Holy Spirit came out of me. And that guy he cried. I guess he hadn't cried in 40 years, and he cried that day and couldn't stop crying. And I told him it was Jesus. And I ministered to him and told him it was Jesus. And I told him that...
You think he actually seen as something in the spirit? Because wasn't he into some like occult New Age
yeah,
stuff?
I knew that, so they were involved in a lot of occult and witchcraft stuff.
So a lot of times people that...
But this is someone who said that he hadn't cried in 40 years and had a very hard heart and could not stop crying.
He seen that shield that softened him up a little bit.
I think he experienced the glory. God will go where he's everywhere, even at the dope house.
At that point, when this
I heard the Holy Spirit audibly tell me, you're about to go to a place you're not going to come back from. Now, whether that meant prison, death, I don't really know what that meant, but I heard him audibly, and I knew that I didn't want to find out what that was. Oh. And so what I did was I went to my grandfather's house.
What did you tell? I'm recalling. Remember, what did you tell him when you were leaving?
Oh, when I was leaving, when I was leaving, I told him, I'm going to live for Jesus, and I'm never coming back. And I never did. And I meant every word that I said, and I never went back. And I do live for him today. And but I went to my grandfather's house, and this is the good news we were talking about in the beginning. And it's hard to really cover everything because there's so much. It's so much. We're just trying to hit a couple, the stories. But I went to his house because he'd always feed me and let me in, and my grandmother was there. And, I was on meth, so, I couldn't sleep. So I went to his study. He had a lot of books there. And somebody had been telling me, a friend of mine had been telling me about Teen Challenge. And I was like, I'm not going there. I've been to 8 different recovery ministry or treatment programs. Nobody can help me. But she'd been telling me Teen Challenge. And I was like, isn't that for kids? But I went to his study and I read a book, and I pulled out a book out of his study. It was The Cross and the Switchblade. And I didn't know it at the time. But when I finished that book, I realized that was the founder of Teen Challenge that wrote that book.
And that was your sign?
That was my sign. And I audibly heard the Holy Spirit again. I've heard him audibly like only a handful of times.
So when you said you hear God audibly. Now that you heard him audibly say you're fixing to go to a place that you're never.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And then you hear him again audibly that he wants you to go to Teen Challenge.
Yes, he
now,
said.
Now is this the first time these are the first 2 times you feel like you'd heard the Lord on that? Because I've heard the Lord. What I feel like when you say audibly, was it more from the inside? I'm just asking, but it's not from the inside out instead of from the outside in, right? But it's like you can hear.
Yeah, it's like a thunderous from the, one time I think, it was from the outside in, but this time when he talked to me about Teen Challenge, it was probably from the inside out, like a thunder. Well,
he may have been on the outside of you talking in one time, and then
it's really,
next time he was probably in you talking to you. Yeah.
It's really hard to explain, but I
got an idea. I've had experiences. Yeah. I don't like to over spiritualize. Where I'm like always like I hear from God and like that way for people that don't have those experiences still have a measure of faith, and people can hear from God in different ways. But I have had the experiences, a couple where I actually heard the voice of the Lord. And
that's true. He speaks to us all differently, but he does speak to all of us. But so I read that. That was my confirmation, and I knew the Holy Spirit said, this is where you're going to go to receive your healing. Because, see, that's why I could never stop using Daniel. I couldn't figure it out. I had a genuine encounter. I had gotten saved, but I had not been healed. My soul wounds.
So every time it got hit, every time those wounds get hit, you would get back the same cycle.
Right.
So.
And so from there, I packed up and went to Teen Challenge.
The Teen Challenge. Mm-hmm. So what was the hardest part of Teen Challenge? Because we do it. See, we do a program that's a year long, and I went through the Foundry Rescue Mission, and Bessemer Colonie went through Teen Challenge. So we know that we know that setting that time apart and letting the Lord work in your life, we know that works. And obviously everybody can't do that, but we're a believer in those that at the end of those and they can and set themselves apart and be in a protected environment with the Word of God. We believe that works. But Colonie, what do you think out of that year you was at Teen Challenge? What was it about that time that made that stick?
The people there were great, but mostly, other than the great staff that they had, was just a place where I could be still. A place that I could be still and learn about God and read my Bible and learn discipline.
The root word of disciple.
Right. I didn't like being told what to do, but really when I got to surrender in my heart and just laying everything down, I had to lay my daughter down, my agenda down, and I really just surrendered to His process and to His plans. And it wasn't like no supernatural, moment.
Yeah.
It was just
the process.
the consistency of the process.
Well, we're going to take a few minute break, and we'll come back and close things on out, but and let Colonie tell you a little bit about what she's doing today and what life's looked like, since she graduated from Teen Challenge. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, guys, welcome back. We got a couple minutes, and like I said, we're going to pass it back to Colonie. And Colonie, tell us what happened with you from after you left Teen Challenge.
Well, God honored my commitment there. I received my healing. I realized that the reason, that I had used drugs was because I'd been healed of unforgiveness. And I dealt with that. And I graduated in 2007. I got my daughter back. And shortly, a year later, we met.
Your God husband.
My God husband. And, I just did what normal people do. I started working, and I decided to go back to school. And I graduated from the University of Alabama with my master's degree in social work. And that was a huge accomplishment for someone who always felt like a failure. And that is when we decided, when I graduated that semester of college, that me and you wanted to take, everything in our lives that we had been through to help somebody else struggling with addiction.
All things work together for the good.
Right, because we know how hopeless it is. We know the destruction it causes, and we know that there's a way out. That's the whole purpose of having this show, is to.
We have a minute or two left. If you could talk to the people, what would you recommend? How do you start this journey, and what's the prayer that you would pray to call out to God just to begin the process of hope? And maybe maybe you could close us out with praying.
Okay. Well, the first thing that I would recommend you doing is call out to God. He answers us by setting us free, and that would be the very first thing that I would do. The second thing to do is find somebody that can help you find a place to go to, somebody to pray for you, and get the help that you need. And God does the rest. All you have to do is ask, and He'll be faithful. So I'd love to pray for anybody today. And I just pray right now, if you're struggling with addiction, that God would just deliver you, that His presence and the Holy Spirit would just surround you right now, and that God would comfort you and deliver you. He is a bondage breaker. He's the one that breaks every yoke of bondage, and He has the power to do it, and He just wants you to experience His love and to bring you a destiny, a hope, and a future. And I bless you today, and I bless, God's plans in your life, and, just know that you're worth it. And whatever that the enemy has said to you is not the truth. You need to believe what God says about you, and that you're worth it, and you're somebody, and He's got, hope for you.
As long as there's breath, there's hope. And what we do by faith. And everybody's given a measure of faith. And you may not feel like it, you may not feel worthy, but I can promise you this: if you call out to the Lord and you ask Him to save you, and you do that with your mouth, you believe in your heart and you confess with your mouth, and you could do it right now, and the Lord Himself will come and live on the inside of you, and He will perfect those things that you started, and the perfect word. So we just bless you guys, and we're praying for you, and like I said, we plan on doing this once a week, and so you're invited to watch, and we love you, and God loves you, and God bless you.